So I was 27 in 1980 when I had to quit marathon racing, and I shifted over to triathlon. I did 2 years of triathlon, finished fourth at Ironman in Hawaii, and then just said, you know what, it hurts too much. I'm still too injured. When I say I switched from, I got injured in running, I couldn't run 100 miles a week anymore at a high level. But I could ride a bike. So my injuries were sort of like osteoarthritis and tendonitis in my hips. So I could ride a bike and I could swim. I just couldn't run 100 miles a week. So I leveraged my running experience into triathlon.
Yeah. When you hear the word paleo now,
yep,
you kind of created this whole movement a little bit. But what does that mean to you anymore? And like the primal side of things.
I helped advance it. I didn't create it, but
I'll give it to you.
No,
you don't have to.
Whatever. But
take it. You got it.
But if we go back, 10 or 15 years, again, looking at how evolution shaped who we are today and how we've lost track of that and lost control of that, the term paleo seemed to be appropriate to describe the lifestyle of our ancient ancestors, and particularly in the early days, paleo was basically really about diet and what they ate and how that created an expectation of our genes. So our genes are this recipe that wants to build us strong and lean, has certain expectations of certain inputs. If we don't give it those inputs, if we give it ho-hos and ding-dongs and Coca-Cola and Big Macs all the time, we're going to fall apart, which we see in society. So paleo became a great initial operating term. I think, unfortunately, over the last 5 years, it's kind of declining in popularity as a search term. I think it's been too attached to the caveman experience and less associated with what it should be, which is an ancestral approach to health, which is basically looking at real food, getting a lot of sleep, movement patterns that are building us up rather than tearing us down and things like that. So, I have great expectations for where the world is headed in this movement, in this ancestral world. That's one of the original reasons that I chose Primal as my brand and stayed away from the word paleo, is I felt that paleo, again, had that connotation of kind of the caveman, camp out in your backyard and hunt for neighbors' pets or whatever it was. It was some kind of weird pigeonhole that a lot of people got turned off. A lot of people got attracted to it, right, for the same reasons. But a lot of people got turned off to it. So primal became of primary importance, sort of the primal urge, primal scream, primal kind of thing. So I'm glad I spent the time to work on a brand name that had a little bit more mass appeal across a broad spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So have you always kind of eaten the way that you eat now, or did you make like a full 180 shift, like being an endurance athlete? Was it super high carb, low fat back in the day, and then total flip?
Yeah. If you look, the legendary diet of Michael Phelps would be a good example. You see what that cat used to eat during his training and racing days.
It was like 10,000 calories.
Yeah. Which I would sometimes, I'd take a little bit of an issue with it. I don't think you can, on a regular basis, shove that amount of calories down your pie hole, but maybe.
So it makes for a good clip on
its own story.
He once ate 10,000 calories in a day.
Yeah. But no, I was, there was a time, first of all, when everybody in the science world thought that this whole endurance experience was about managing glycogen. It was about managing carbohydrate intake and making sure, because, if you run out of glycogen, you hit the ball game's over. Covert Bailey wrote a book called Fit or Fat, and his sort of key word was fat burns in the carbohydrate flame. So there's a lot of this. One of the greatest science writers and researchers around, Tim Noakes, promoted this thing about managing carbohydrates and managing glycogen and carbo loading and all this stuff. So for decades, that's what we did. As endurance athletes, you managed glycogen stores. And you sort of realized that maybe you were going to train yourself to burn fat just by the very nature of putting in the miles. There was still this requirement that you had to just keep taking in carbohydrates to keep doing it. And then the irony of being an endurance athlete is you do it every single day. So you deplete carbohydrates on day one on a long workout, and then if you're going to do a long workout the next day, you got to replenish carbohydrates. And so you get into this cycle where you're taking in, I was taking in minimum 500 and sometimes 1,000 grams of carbs a day. And again, if you do the math, 1,000 grams of carbs is only 4,000 calories. So it's not like 10,000. But But you think about 1,000 grams of carbs.
That's insane. Is that all liquid drinking?
No, God. Well, I mean, beer. Like, there's a lot of beer in there.
Yeah.
This is back in the days when some of the best runners in the world were drinking copious amounts. I mean, they were basically shit-faced every night, and then going out and running hard again the next day because beer was a legitimate carbo-loading, modality, if you will. But lots of spaghetti, lots of bread, pasta, cereal. There was an attempt to get some whole grains in there, but that in and of itself became problematic for me, the whole grain side of things. So I went from, I didn't do a 180. It was a gradual turn, like a big, an oil tanker trying to turn around in a, they don't really do a 180. But it was first of all recognizing when I had to quit that I didn't need that amount of calories, and I was kind of afraid that I was going to get skinny fat. Because I was never going to get big. I figured I'd put on some fat if I kept eating like that, some body fat. So I cut back on the amount of food I was eating. And then I started doing the research on healthy fats, and I realized that I had been missing some healthy fats in my diet. Again, in conjunction with this sort of accepted mantra that you needed to carbo load was you had to avoid fats because of heart disease, right? So I had to, again, it was like the worst of both worlds, not the best of both worlds. So I started increasing the amount of healthy fats in my diet. I started looking. I'd always been doing research. I was I was a biology major in college. I was pre-med. I'd sort of chased performance through diet from the early days anyway, even though the advice was wrong. I was reading all the books. Robert Haas wrote a book called Eat to Win. It was really very carb-centric, and so on. So over the time, I decreased the amount of carbs, increased the amount of fat. And then I was cutting way back on the work, and that was the other thing that I realized that I'd been working way too hard, and that they were, as I started coaching people, professional athletes in my late 30s, and I was still keeping up with them. I was like, I had these guys that were racing for world championships, and I'd be out training with them, not every day, and that was the big issue. I could train with them once or twice a week and ride with them or run with them. I just couldn't do it every day. So as I got older, my recovery time expanded. I needed more recovery time, but my performance was still right up there on probably 30% of the work that I'd been doing in the height of my career. So I started to put these things together that we don't need to train that much, that recovery is critical to this. I started to realize that that this idea of burning fat was really critical to endurance performance, that you had to learn how to burn fat. And if you could burn fat and then offset the need to take in extraneous carbohydrates, that would be a great performance enhancer. So over the years, I developed this primal blueprint, which looked at what is, about 15 years ago, I created the primal blueprint carbohydrate curve. And it's this thing that I doodled on a napkin. And it basically had these divisions of, 0 to 50 was in ketosis, 50 to 100 is sort of the sweet spot for weight loss, 100 to 150 is like maintenance for weight for your weight, and then anything above 150 on a daily basis in terms of grams of carbs was problematic. And I caught a lot of shit for it in the early days. Like, how can you possibly say this? It's been 15 years since I created that chart, and every single year it gets more and more clear to me that was pretty much spot on.
Yeah.